So let's move on to the social area. And this is one that we could spend an entire podcast on. And this is about social change. It's about our social impact and our social responsibility as associations. And so a couple of things that I wanted to cover in this particular bucket are DEI actions, any kind of social responsibility, social stands, for example, that you might have taken in your own associations, and the myriad of HR and workplace transitions. And I don't know, Larry, since you were on stage last, let's just bring you in to talk about this, because if there's one area that's been turned on its head, it's the HR broad functional areas. Let's take it away.
Everything that your HR function, well, first of all, when you're done with this podcast, you should send your HR leader a lovely note and tell them how wonderful they are, how they have world-changing superpowers, and that you could not do your job without them. You really ought to let them know that. From a human capital standpoint, every single thing that you do from an HR perspective has to be rethought. Benefits. Okay, what do benefits look like? Increase in mental health allowances, right? Compensation. I had an employee say to me, well, since we're not in the office anymore and we're saving so much on water, gas, and electricity, maybe you all should give us a stipend for our internet. And you never even, for 50, you only think about it for about 15 seconds after they say it, but you never would engage in that level of conversation before all of this happens. And what it has done for the HR function, a function that prides itself on being proactive, it has thrown us into a completely reactive mode because we don't know what to expect. We don't know what's coming. And at the same time as this is happening, you have the election, you have the death, you have the murder of George Floyd, you have all of this bubbling up. And now you're dealing with employee relations issues of people saying things that they never would have said, if we were in person and collaborating face to face. But on the screen or virtually, they may throw a little comment out that is not perceived to be very sensitive racially or otherwise. Every nook and cranny that you have a part of your HR program has to be rethought and refocused. One of the things that we're doing at AIA is we are really looking at how do we create a culture of belonging. So we're trying to celebrate the identities in our workforce and create an environment where everyone belongs. Your uniqueness makes you a strong candidate to be a part of our culture. Diversity, it's on that on that DEI trajectory. Diversity I always say this, diversity is inviting people to the dance. Inclusion is asking them to dance. And then when they start dancing like Elaine from Seinfeld with the thumbs and the, offer, it's okay. You can come and dance any way you want to, because that uniqueness makes you a part of this culture. We've had to spend more time relative to the nurturing and the care of our employees. I brought in a psychologist, Dr. Laura. No, Dr. Lynn, sorry. Whoopsie. And once a month we have a session. It's a collective session. It's not a one-on-one thing, but it's a collective session. And we choose a topic based on what I've been hearing the month before of what people are struggling with. And Dr. Lynn is there to help people with that try to deal with those issues. I never would have thought about that in quote unquote normal times. And the other thing that's interesting is that in the HR profession, there's a lot of movement now. There are a lot of positions available in other places. And so people are moving from organization to organization, which only lends to the chaos. So it is a challenge. And I think that, again, when we go back to the office, I think some of these challenges are going to continue to be prevalent in our workforces.
I do too. Thanks, Larry. One of the questions I have is do you compensate employees for home offices? And what about professional liability? How has that changed with everybody working remotely?
Right. And it would be lovely to do that. What we're thinking about doing is giving everyone a remote stipend, where you would just get $300 or $400 or whatever, and you can take it and use it for anything you need to use it for to set up and maintain your home office. I have people, we just bought, before we went remote, we bought all these brand new, beautiful Herman Miller chairs. They are beautiful. They're like $15,000, $16,000. I have people going to the building, throwing their chairs in their trucks and just driving, driving off. So, we got to put a little stop to that. But people want to replicate their work office home. There are certain things, and I said this to the staff, there are certain things that we're going to be able to help you with, and there are certain things that we're not going to help you with. We're not going to pay for your internet, but we will give you some help with your supplies and materials or whatever. But you have to balance that with your other benefits and where you are in the organization financially. We had to have a reduction in force. We laid off about 12 people at the end of last year. So everything you do financially, your employees are watching you. So how are you giving everyone $500 for their home office, but you just laid off my friend? So everything has to be done in integration and in sync, or you will start losing your people, start losing their confidence. I am proud to say that we still have the confidence of our people, and I'm just hoping that lasts. And I'm hoping that your people have confidence in you as well.
Oh, thank you, Larry. It's really helpful. Does anybody ever think about having either a remote first philosophy or an office first philosophy? Because there are different pros and cons to each of those. Have any of you addressed that?
Well, I'll start out with a non-answer. We're sorting that out right now. I'll just maybe start by saying I agree completely with Larry that probably the most important position in the organization right now is our HR leader. And we couldn't have, in our HR team, we couldn't have survived this without having the right people on the bus. But also, we spent years working on culture in the organization, really thinking about how we work together, how we criticize each other, how we, are sort of have healthy dialogue, healthy debate in the organization, complete projects and hold people accountable. And we couldn't have worked through this period unless those pieces were in place. And that all came through HR. And now HR has had to step forward even into another role to make sure the glue sticks in this environment. With our HR leader, she has put together in the organization a future of work team. And they're looking at the work rules, and will be making recommendations to the executive team and to myself. Where we're kind of thinking that things are going to go is it will be primarily it'll be your choice, basically. We have a beautiful building we built about 4 years ago that now is you know, anybody want a building? But that is not really the future. And, you know, we're all hearing about companies reducing their employee footprint. We'll be, you know, in that. And so we'll be looking at our offices as a place where we hotel, where we meet, where we problem solve, where we onboard people, where there might be quarterly meetings, and it'll be a place where people, this is the thinking, where people could say, you know, I really do prefer the office. But for the most part, people can, and they're already beginning to, just work where they want. So people are beginning to buy homes in Florida, Arizona, Iowa, I don't know why, but there are, you know, moving to different places because the environment is providing them the opportunity to do it. They're building out these home offices, and we're, for the most part, really working well together, you know, with the technology and with all that kind of stuff. So I hope that helps. The thing that's really missing, though, and I'll just close on this note, is I think we've been able to maintain the sense of community in the office. Where we're losing the sense of community is in the community. And the people are, because communities have broken down, our society has broken down, just being totally honest, and people are looking to the workplace as a place of stability and where they can have conversations that they're not able to have anywhere else right now. And so there's a challenge and really a burden on the CEO to facilitate conversations that I think are really outside our comfort zone.
Pam, I'd like to.
Oh, please go ahead.
No, I just wanted to pick up on that point. And throughout this thread, as well as the economic thread, I've looked at COVID, the murder of George Floyd, as being a punctuation mark on underlying social unrest in the country. And then January 6th and what we're into now as a series of not only slow rolling crises, but frankly, a crucible that has accelerated a number of trends that were happening anyway. It's not like remote work wasn't a consideration. The resistance to remote work was often built in the management culture of a given organization. But what I think it's done is it's forced us to look on the outputs and the relationships and which relationships need to be face-to-face in order to enact the work that's being done. I was on a call with a colleague the other day, a group of colleagues, and one CEO was talking about the impact of the impact of being able to work from anywhere, which we have been for quite some time. But how does that relate to equity in the workplace and the opportunity for promotion? And I realized in the conversation that there was a very subtle but implicit bias that the member services people had to be physically present at one place. And in my mind, I'm going, wait a minute, the member services people haven't been physically present for 9 months. But to Paul's point, I think one of the things we lose is there's a degree of spontaneity that in certain problem-solving situations is lost in the face-to-face environment. So right now, it feels like the pendulum has swung to one side of the equation, which is virtual. And we need to be mindful not to overgeneralize about what technology is going to do to us in a virtual world, that it will settle in a middle that is different. But as we're thinking about things like diversity, equity, and inclusion, looking at that lens, I'm trying to be mindful of who has the technological access. I'm aware, for example, of companies that now are that in some states have to post the wage range for a job description based on the job itself, not on where you lived, because some employees are saying, well, wait a minute, you know, if you live in a cheaper place, you're getting a better differential than if I have to live, say, in a higher cost place like DC. Should I receive a higher wage? And they have asked, because I live in a place that is more expensive. Yes, I would really like a stipend based on my internet, but on the other hand, I'm saving a whole lot on my commute. On the other hand, my childcare situation is really different. And to me, I think the one question that remains to be answered is, what are the liabilities going to be like if we get to requiring people to work from home? That becomes their work environment. And now we have OSHA-like rules based on, well, do you have a safe work environment? Is it one that you're going to be able to focus on your job? What happens if somebody isn't able to meet the requirements of their job because of their family situation. It's pretty messy right now. But so I think this conversation ultimately tees up far more questions than we have an answer. But to Larry's point, absolutely, hell yeah. We need to be mindful of these. What's happening is, from a technological, economic, HR standpoint, it's accelerating all these questions. And for me as a CEO, it's almost overwhelming because now they all have almost equal value that they all have to get answered now. That's my rant. I'm sticking to it.
No, well, and it's the right rant, and it's a conversation, and many conversations in one that have to continue. The question.
Pam, if I could just jump in on that thread for a moment. When we talk about the workforce, particularly as it relates to technology, I think there'll be a period, and we're already experiencing that, where we'll have to either reskill, right, because of this digital first, this digital training. Not everyone has that in their background or in their portfolio. And we're, the pace of change has accelerated and so quickly. And to Don's point, we need digital strategy, but we need the right team players that know how to execute, that know how to project manage, that know how to work across the organization. We know we need stronger content strategy. So there's going to be a huge shift towards that. And I'm concerned that just like find a really good IT person or really good HR person, it's going to be really hard for us to find a strong content education person, because we're not, our events have changed. We are event producers now. And so that's a whole new skill set that we should be thinking about. And in terms of equity, diversity, inclusion, diversity, equity, inclusion, welcoming environment is how we position at Association Forum. We as associations are going to be held more accountable, because last year was a year of statements. This is going to be a year of action. And when we think about the youth that was out there holding us accountable, they're going to be in our workplaces. And so we're going to have to adapt. So I'm not surprised, Larry, to hear you say, they're saying, look, I want a stipend. I'm hearing that in my smaller organization. And it is startling. Like, wait a minute, you have a job. So,
Thankful.
that's at least what I thought. Maybe it's a generational thing. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and that's an interesting point, and the thing that I kind of come back to as well is that as CEO, well, I think that back to Mark's point, this is whitewater, and we're in whitewater right now, the rafting whitewater, and we are, a lot of what we're doing is making it up as we go along. And somebody used the word earlier, maybe Pamela, it was you, Sherpa. We're kind of like the Sherpas here. We're helping to guide a variety of stakeholders with different needs, different needs and wants and preferences through this whitewater. And the only difference, I guess, is we've never been down this river.
Yeah.
And it's extraordinarily difficult. And the thing I think we can't lose in all this is, and I guess this, to center it back, I was reading something today about different forms of capitalism and who's the most important. Is it the stakeholder, the shareholder, the employee? Who is it? And I think the thing we've got to remember is that unless and until we can create value for somebody, we don't have anything. And so somehow we're going to have to help to navigate and help guide our team of diverse stakeholders through this experience and help them to be able to make the transition to a different world where value is created differently. And to Michelle's specific point about where we're going to get the technical skills and the specialists to do this, I think we're going to have to grow them, because we're not going to be able to compete with Amazon or other folks. I think we're going to have to upskill our workforces. We're going to have to grow these folks. I think we can do it, but I think it's going to take a different mindset.
If I can, Pam, I just want to add on something that I think, Joe, you phrased that beautifully, and Paul and others have earlier. In a preparatory call, we come up with that idea of, where's the playbook? Who stole the playbook? It's been shredded. It's been vaporized. It's no longer there. I think, when Michelle talks about reskilling, I think Paul and Joel sort of implied this. We're reskilling as CEOs.
Yeah.
I think we're required to develop a whole new set of skills. And I've shared it on forums like this, back in, May, June timeframe, I frankly was adrift. I've been at this a long time, 40 years this year. And I just felt I had no skills, no ammunition, no playbook, no roadmap. And I think all of us are pioneers in this new post-pandemic, current pandemic, new playbook world. The playbook on playbooks has been thrown away, and we have to reinvent the whole thing from the ground up.
That's so true. I cringe now when I hear someone say, "That's not my job." I'm like, what? You can't say that anymore.
Yeah, but there's something very exciting about that, isn't it? I mean, it really is a reason, I think, a new reason to get up in the morning. I think it's an exciting time to be a CEO in this space, particularly as we enter, so many issues are intersected. I know even in interviewing, I'm wondering if any of you are doing this in behavioral interviewing. I'm sure your HR teams are doing this. Are you interviewing people for DEI? To really assessing their behaviors in the workplace. I think that's going to be an important role again for HR moving forward if they're not already doing that. I know that we are, to ensure that people aren't just giving this critical area just a lot of lip service like we have over the years, that people are finally putting some muscle behind it. And I'm also wondering, are you seeing is there any conversation about this in the boardroom? Are your boards talking about it, Paul?
A couple points. First, in the boardroom. So this is a real challenge for associations. The board set policy, the staff organization carried it out, outcomes were set. Fairly straightforward. Now we're heading into a really difficult and turbulent time. The boards, we're a large organization. Many of us have large organizations. I'd be interested in Larry's perspective because it's a large national, international organization. Our board represents America. It's all the extremes. We got everything on every side, and a lot of people having difficulty with the changes that are taking place in our society while we speak. So on the staff level, there's an imperative for me to create an organization that is attractive, that is welcoming, that is really a place people want to be in these turbulent times. And in the boardroom, they're still having trouble making sense of all this. And I think that and our elected leaders in our organizations are sensitive to the politics. They're raised in the profession. Sometimes these issues are scary for them. They have their, the people that have supported them on their way up, and they may hold, particular political views. It falls on the CEO, I think, to go into some dangerous territory, to bridge what's happening between the staff and the way the staff sees the world, the organization sees the world, and help the board kind of interpret the world and the way it's happening. Presidents in volunteer organizations turn over every year or so. And sometimes the tough issues, they think, yeah, we'll put this off to next year. Joe can handle this. Don can handle this. Whatever. We'll put it off. We can't put it off. And the CEO, I think, is in a position where they have to apply gentle and steady pressure in helping the board interpret what's going on and forcing the need for change. It puts us very much at risk. And that's why I'm working on my resume right now. I'm kidding. No, but I think, to what Gary said before, we have to reinvent ourselves. And suddenly, we used to be very good, leaders, of running operations, running businesses. But now, we're really interpreting a lot of social change for our universe of people. We may not be leading medicine. We may not be leading architecture, but we certainly are providing leadership to the group in terms of interpreting, a very turbulent world and helping that leadership navigate that turbulent world. I don't know if that makes any sense. But.
It makes a ton of sense, and it's a very interesting position description that you have for the association CEO these days, isn't it? These things never turned up on a position profile before.
And they're very contextual. I would say as well. You know, I have been in this role in organizations where we had to pull and push and cajole and inform to get them to pay attention to some of these issues. I now work for an organization that leans very far forward on equity, diversity, and inclusion, very far forward. And the challenge that I have is how to avoid just being involved in a massive amount of activity that feels good, but instead to help to build a very kind of deliberately have a strategy, a strategic approach that builds a culture, that builds practices that are replicable, that can be built upon, that lasts, that is sustainable. And it's an entirely different challenge. And as you said earlier, you know, all of this, maybe this makes us a little strange, but it's exciting. You know, I think that, you know, I don't know, you know, maybe this is part of the gap that exists between us and our teams. But, you know, this is, like you said, what makes me want to get up in the morning and tackle this. You know, it's exciting stuff, but it's very contextual.
I'm not a CEO, but I can say that I think it is an exciting time, because I think what you all are having to do, and most of the people here didn't have this problem, but I think what CEOs are having to do, it's not about leader preference anymore. You know, a lot of culture is based on the preference of the leader. You know, there are a lot of things that you do or allowed to do and not allowed to do have no theoretical grounding in anything. It's, you know, Joel doesn't like that, or, you know, Gary doesn't like that. But what's happening now, it's you're reaching out to your cabinet, you're reaching out to, you know, your leaders, and you're asking them for help. They're getting attention that they may not have gotten from their leaders in the past, that their work is at a higher value. It's been valued all along, but now you're in a situation to really reach down or reach over and say, come talk to me, come work with me, come share with me what you know, because if you share with me what you know, collaboratively, we can make a difference. And so it is an exciting time. You know, I have a very good working relationship with my CEO and my boss, the chief of staff, but I do know some HR and technology people who are ignored. You know, they never get audience with their leader because it's a taken for granted type of function. But now it's exciting because my colleagues are getting that, you know, attention makes it sound so parochial, but it's getting the exposure that they so need, the validation that what they bring is of value to the organization. So that's what makes it exciting.
No, it's important, isn't it? You know, and you've got 260 or so components or chapters. A number of you have chapters. How do you push this out into the communities, the DEI initiatives, and really action-oriented activities around it?
So Pam, because you know, I'm a glutton for punishment, we also picked this time to decide to try to restructure our entire chapter structure. Oh. We have 133 plus 10. But I wanted to pick up on Larry's comment. I think one of the things that a CEO has to be able to do, or senior management right now, is it is essential within the cultures of our organizations to demonstrate a certain degree of vulnerability and reflection in this process. So if I'm not cognizant and you know, I've never been pushed like I have in my entire adult life to be aware of things like privilege and my voice and where it matters and how to navigate what are also emerging cultural issues between board members who have never before expressed how different their opinions are, to Paul's point, which places us in a very interesting and intriguing position. That's magnified now when we talk to chapter leaders about what inclusion looks like from the standpoint of a customer experience. What's the experience you have with us? And to do that, we've been trying to come back to a sense of mission. Not only why are we here, but what might we look like and who will we intersect with 3, 4, 5 years from now? And just all of the issues we've seen socially have accelerated that discussion, I think actually in a very positive and engaging way. There have been some folks who've been defensive, just like we're seeing out in society, but I will say it's not limited to what have been at the forefront in terms of race issues, but religion. I've been blessed in 3 different denominations in the last year going out to chapter meetings because we were doing invocations. They didn't have any idea of what my religious perspective is or is not. So, you know, I'm mindful, Larry, to your point about being invited to the party, right? You're invited to the party. Inclusion is being welcome to stay at the party, especially depending on how you choose to dance. We have to be able to model that nationally and get across to our chapters in particular that failure to address those issues in a diverse and inclusive way is an existential threat to your organization. So I can bring it around to that. It's not just the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do in terms of serving your mission, because your customers 5, 10 years down the road are not going to look like the customers are now, much less 5 or 10 years ago. And as a CEO, to be able to be passionate about that and then enable the organization to navigate that problem is an exciting and tricky proposition, to say the very least, in these times. And Paul, I definitely think that it places some challenges on our association brand versus our personal brand as a CEO. And in some cases, CEOs will have a choice to make about whether or not the culture and approach of the organization is going to be a fit for me in a more prominent and ever more visible leadership position going forward.
You know, it's a good point that you make, Mark, and I can tell you that interviewing CEO candidates, they are more interested in culture and community and all of the things that we've been talking about for the last 15 minutes than they are in the job itself. It has been really interesting, and they want demonstrable proof. You know, it's not just well, you know, the board wants to do this. It's not that. They want to see evidence that there's real action in these areas. I'm pleased to see that.
You know, Pam, it strikes me that in our pre-COVID life, especially in the C-suite and the corner office, there was a little bit of insularity. I mean, if you have 3,000 or 20,000 or 90,000 members, you know, you're likely not going to bump into them. There's less of a sense of an intimacy as we have now. I mean, you're right here. You're an arm's length away, and I see members and people around our community on a much more close contact basis this way than I did if I happened to bump into them casually at an annual conference, shake hands, maybe have a chat, and off you go. It's much more intimate. And so I think as a result, we're connected to these issues or engaged in these issues far, and it's been such a crazy year that that's what's on everybody's mind. And so you're drawn into these, whether you want to or not, and you're suddenly discovering things about others that you would not have discovered had you bumped into them once a year at the annual conference.
No, I'm intrigued by that because I see that quite a bit, and I think it also transitioned into our home life, right? Because you start having these conversations around the dinner table.
Yeah.
Maybe conversations that are far more substantive. When we greet colleagues, it's not just, hi, how are you? Check that one off the list. Now we really want to know how people are.
You know, I think it makes CEOs more human, right? And more vulnerable. And
approachable.
I'm sorry?
More
approachable and vulnerable. And those, I mean, I think it starts with having the uncomfortable conversations and modeling the way. To the point that you asked, how do you communicate this? You have the conversations because you have pockets of employees who are severely impacted by the social unrest. And having that conversation to show empathy, to understand where that person is at that point in time, that's employee retention. That's engagement. Yeah. And they'll go the extra mile for you because silence tells a story. And we are all in this together. And again, it's about the actions that we take. I mean, I know, Paul, you've invested significantly in your DEI efforts, and you are having those you're inserting yourself. And I remember I had a conversation with Paul once, and you said, look, you told an employee, I believe, and if I'm wrong, well, correct me. You said, I have not walked in your shoes, but I can walk beside you. And that's very important. That's the vulnerability that people need right now. So I think that having those conversations, being uncomfortable is a very clear way, and being okay to say you don't know, because you've had privilege, you've been entitled, and some have not, right? So just having that level of support and allyship is critical these days.
No kidding. Thank you, Michelle. Let's take a quick summary of this. I would like to spend a couple of minutes on governance, if you all can hang in there for a few more minutes. But we talked about so much here. I think it's an area that raises more questions and gives me so many more ideas for future conversations. I hope you'll hang in there with me for the future. But human capital and the HR issues are the plethora of them, which we are all engaged in. And again, more questions than we have answers, but I think this is a stretch for all of us. And the first thing that we learned is to give your human resource and human capital people a big virtual hug. So I think that's important to remember as a takeaway. And we talked about this is an area that overlaps so easily with the DEI issues and actions. And I think we approached this, we intersected both of these, and some of the specific actions that you are taking, the conversations that you have had, and I think the evolving role of the CEO, which is still evolving, and how the things that used to be considered weaknesses, like vulnerability, is now considered a strength. If you were vulnerable, you were weak. Quite the contrary now. Compassion, you see that all the time. So it is going to be interesting to see if we can actually have a compassionate form of capitalism. And I think we're starting to see some of that in many different areas. Paul?
Yeah, I'll just make a point. That vulnerability is the key. And admitting mistakes and learning, from your mistakes. But I think it's important for the CEO to know the right questions to ask. Mm-hmm. And so relying on others for insights, relying on their team for insights, relying on their board for insights, and being a good synthesizer of those insights. I forget the specific reference in the 7 measures of success. Michelle and I were just talking about last week. I talked about the CEO as a broker of ideas. And I think that still resonates. I think that's still there. And so it's just, we don't know exactly what the idea is. We're more like the captain of the Starship Enterprise, and it's knowing the right question. We're going into the unknown, but knowing those questions and being brave enough to ask those questions, I think is key.
Yeah, no kidding. Thank you, Paul.